Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming along. For those of you who haven't met me before, my name is Kieran Rooney. I am the co-lead of the SPARTAN network, which obviously many of you would have known now from news bulletins and the like as a members event, but it's our Faculty of Medicine and Health supported network for sport and physical activity research and teaching. The idea is that the network should bring together industry partners, institutes and academics and practitioners across both sport and physical activity for the number one goal of simply networking. We are effectively referred to as the party people in the upper echelons of the faculty. We have no funding for grants or publications or anything of worth like that. Our entire budget is for parties, bringing in speakers. And so the food and drink is all on us. We put a small stipend towards travel fees. So really, if by nothing more than having something to eat and drink this afternoon, you have achieved the goal of today. We have 3 core seminars each year. There's the Helen O'Connor seminar that is held always in May on World Ovarian Cancer Day to celebrate one of our beloved academics who passed away some years ago now from ovarian cancer. That focuses on women in sport and physical activity research, either women conducting the research or research on women. We have our winter seminar, which is focused specifically on high performance sport, for which you're sitting here as well, and also an early plug for our spring seminar, typically around mid to late October, which is focused on physical activity and sport participation and engagement. That one will be announced in the next month or so. But for today, I've got the wonderful duty of welcoming you to our winter seminar and acknowledge and start off by acknowledging and paying respect to the elders past, present and emerging for sharing the lands upon which we meet, which for this campus is the Gadigal lands of the Eora Nation. I won't take up too much more time. I'm going to call upon the co-lead for the special interest group on sleep within Spartan, Dr. Elizabeth Machin, who will introduce our keynote.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for coming along today. As Kieran mentioned, I'm the lead of the Special Interest Group for Sleep, which is a recent group that we brought together to help bring academics doing research in sport with an interest in, research in sleep with an interest in sport and physical activity to group, to help each other, to support each other and really network or improve access to resources and expertise in the space. And so we met earlier this year and we really wanted to have something that we could bring to the broader community when it came to sleep and athletes, because it's really hard to access information or to even come across talks at sleep conferences, it seems, when it comes to sport and sleep. And so we proposed a sleep seminar here, or a seminar specific to sleep. And we look no further than Shona to invite her to come along with her expertise in this space. And so Shona is the Deputy Director at the Sprint Research Centre at ACU's School of Behavioural and Health Sciences. Prior to this, she was the head recovery physiologist at the Australian Institute of Sport for over 15 years. And she's led the recovery team at 3 Olympic campaigns with the Australian Olympic Committee. Her research focuses specifically on sleep, recovery and fatigue. And Shona provides consultancy services at the Australian Open tennis tournament, FIFA and Nike, as well as a number of national and international sporting teams. I'm very confident you will all learn something today and very hopeful that most of you can stick around for the networking event at the end so that you might be able to ask some of us to get involved in some of your hopes for your research or for your sporting team or anything in between. Thanks, Shona.
Thanks, Lizzie, for the introduction and being so organised. This was a very well organised trip. And I do love a party, so I'm really looking forward to 6 p.m. And it's been great to see a lot of familiar faces here. Some people I've only ever met on Zoom, some people I used to live with. So it's been lovely already. So of course, here today wanted to talk to you about sleep and athletes. So the work that I've sort of done over the years in the sleep space has really been around sort of monitoring, objective monitoring mainly of sleep in as good athletes as we can sort of get hold of. So it sort of started out in Canberra that I was talking to these athletes around, recovery. So that's sort of how we started out working in the recovery field. And I was getting asked a lot of questions about sleep. And there are really some questions that I thought, I thought you would have known that. Like, you probably shouldn't wake up 4 or 5 times at night to go to the bathroom. I then went to the literature and was like, wow, there's nothing. There was absolutely nothing in really good athletes and sleep. Now, we all just assume that because athletes walk around tired a lot of the time, that they probably sleep well. But we were getting this sort of indication that maybe that wasn't true. So then we started this series of research projects to try and understand sleep in athletes. And I put this up just to start with, in terms of, this is what I sort of think about when I think about recovery. And we get really excited about some of these things and some of these things. You see, when we talk about recovery, we talk about a lot of these therapies, but we often don't really consider how important sleep is as the foundation of all things recovery for athletes. And there's lots that anyone who's ever heard me talk knows that I could talk for hours about how important sleep is for athletes. But in particular, when you look at the amount of time in a 24-hour period that an athlete should spend sleeping or resting, it's a significant amount of time, which is why I put sleep as the foundation of the recovery pyramid. So this was the first lot of research we did. We published it in 2014. We collected the data in 2007. So you can see how long it took us to get that out. Not because it was bad research, I don't think. It was mainly because we were doing other things. And obviously this was at the institute where the focus wasn't on publishing data. But what actually happened is we linked up with the Central Queensland University group in Adelaide, the sleep lab, to do a series of projects trying to understand just how do athletes sleep? What do we actually know? And we used wearables. Sorry, we used activity monitors. We use wearables now, but we used activity monitors, and we found that the bulk of our athletes were getting between 6 and 7 hours a night. And there was quite a number of our athletes who were getting less than the 85% quality of sleep that we like to see. So we like to see probably around here, this at least 7, maybe 8+ in athletes. We weren't seeing a lot of that. And we'd like to see 85% plus. These are young, fit, healthy people. So we were getting a lot of, more athletes in the lower sleep quality than we would have liked. So over the years, we've tried to understand why. And if you look at the life of an athlete, now there's the extremes, right? You could imagine what it would be like trying to sleep in an Olympic village now. One, air conditioning, but let's not talk about that. Beds, let's not talk about that. Noise, stress, that's even before you get to the stress of competition. If you're an athlete I remember when I was, the times that I've stayed in the village, the second week, the first week athletes are partying like crazy. So it's really challenging to sleep. But in a non-Olympic environment, we have all these sort of non-sport factors. So we have things like caffeine, which I'll talk a little bit about, just other work and study commitments, social commitments, family commitments. So all the things that we might experience as well. And then as an athlete, there's a certain number of things that we've seen over the years that get in the way of getting good sleep. So it might be sleeping in a strange environment. So the first night, we call it the first night effect, often don't sleep quite as well. Athletes travel a lot. As Australian athletes, they travel a lot. Early morning training sessions. And again, I'll talk a little bit about this. My goal in life before I finish doing research on athletes is to try and change some of these early morning starts. The night before competition, so just being stressed. Long haul travel, we've all experienced jet lag. The night of competition, so we've done a series of studies in AFL players, rugby players, soccer players, where we see that they really struggle to fall asleep post-match. Again, you could imagine if you've played an AFL game in front of 95,000 people at the MCG, you've had all these lights and all this excitement, you've probably had a lot of caffeine, you might have slept during the day, and all of a sudden we think, oh yeah, well you should sleep, you're tired, it's the end of a match. Doesn't happen. can take 3 to 4 hours, even when everyone's behaving, to fall asleep. And then there's this high training load. So there's been a series of studies now where athletes have been exposed to high training volumes, high training loads, and measured sleep. And we think, well, what the body should do is go, oh, I really need to recover. I really need to sleep because I've got all these high training loads. We don't often see that. We often see a decrease in the quality of sleep with high training loads. So we've seen that, and there's some other papers that have seen that work as well. So you can see that there's a lot of reasons why an athlete may not sleep as well as we would like them to, and as well as they would like to. So I thought I'd just talk about now some of the most common issues that I see in athletes, and then provide some of the science behind it as well. So this was a project we did where we measured sleep with an activity monitor in athletes for about 2 weeks. But before we did that, we asked them, how much sleep do you think you need to feel good? So how much sleep do you feel is about right for you? And what we found was how much sleep they needed versus how much sleep they actually obtained was quite different. On average, when you look at all the athletes over all the nights, it was about an hour and a half. So an hour and a half every single night. Sports like swimming and triathlon, where they have early morning starts, have a greater difference in what they need to what they get. And that can be up to around 2 hours. And that's, of course, where napping comes in, which I will talk about in a moment. We didn't see a lot of differences between genders. So in terms of, we found that our female athletes tended to fall asleep a little bit earlier. They tended to go to bed a little bit earlier, and might have been a slightly biased sample, because what we see is individual sport athletes tend to go to bed earlier and wake earlier, and team sport athletes tend to go to bed later and wake later. But overall, there was no statistical difference between habitual sleep durations of female and male athletes. I'll talk through this one. I know it's a whole lot of dots, but I'll put this up here so I'll remember to talk about it. What we did during COVID is we had access to like thousands and thousands of nights of data, sleep data in athletes measured from activity monitors. And one of the biggest trends at the moment, and I'm sure Lizzie's familiar with this, is this idea that sleep consistency, so bedtime and wake time, is really important. So keeping that consistent. So having a regular sleep pattern is really important. So that's one of the things in the non-athlete sleep world that's getting a lot of attention. So I just thought, oh, look, let's just get the data. Let's just separate those athletes who are the most regular in terms of their sleep to and compare those to the least regular athletes, and just see what their sleep quality and what their sleep duration looks like. So it turns out that if you're really regular in terms of your sleep, it doesn't really have much of an influence on sleep duration, but those athletes who were more regular had a better sleep efficiency or a better sleep quality. So those who were more irregular had a lower sleep quality. And so sometimes I think when you ask athletes questions, and you might have a sleep diary and you look, and sometimes I think I don't need an objective sleep device. You can look at the diary and you can go, oh, bed at 10 o'clock this night, 1 a.m. this night, 10 p.m. this night, 2 a.m. this night. If we look at caffeine intake and social media, I reckon you can with those 3 things, you can kind of get a pretty good idea of what's going on. But a consistent sleep pattern is a really important thing to get. Now, the challenge is it's hard for many athletes. So part of the reasons for that is our fault. Scheduling training sessions really early, or travel really early, or travel really late. But then you can also imagine if you're an NBA player, like how do you get a consistent sleep schedule when you're traveling, you're playing maybe 3 times a week, East Coast, West Coast, wherever. So it can be a real challenge. And so I find when I'm talking to athletes, I sort of encourage this consistency, but understand that it's not always possible, and to try to do the best that they can when they can. Because it's easy to get an athlete stressed because you tell them this is really important, but it's not their fault that they can't do it. It's the external factors that cause the problem. I'm going to keep banging on about this till someone listens to me. Early training start times. So if we have our athletes wake up between 5 and 6 in the morning, they're getting less than 5 hours of sleep. Between 6 and 7 in the morning, less than 6 hours of sleep. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago in Glasgow, and one of the German researcher got up and was talking all about, they couldn't believe their early morning training starts that their swimmers had. They were starting at 7 a.m. And I was like, hold my beer, let's go for 5 a.m. And so I think we have this real culture of early morning training starts. For some sports, I get it. I absolutely get it. Access to equipment, access to nice water. There's lots of reasons. But there's also some sports where this just doesn't protect sleep. It doesn't give athletes an opportunity to sleep. Because if you want to get 8 hours, you're going to bed really early. And sometimes you can't go to bed really early. Then what happens is they have to nap during the day. And that can be okay, or that can just make the wheels completely fall off. So this is some swimmers. What we have here is, this is sleep, so bedtime, wake time. Black is the training session. Black is the afternoon training sessions. This is morning session. This is napping, and if they napped, how many napped. This is a weekend. So you can see what happens here. You can also see, this was at the AIS, and these swimmers lived on res. You can also see how close they wake up to the training session. You can also see when they sleep in. And the coaches would be like, it would take them so long to get them for their athletes, the swimmers, to feel like they were ready to give a good effort. And I was like, this was a 12-minute difference on average. So you can understand that they've still got a fair amount of sleep inertia when they're getting into the first session. But this shift here, so if you look at this standard deviation here, that's 2 o'clock in the afternoon for a wake-up time. Where normally they're getting up here at about 5:48 for a 6 a.m. start. So it's not shift work and it's not jet lag, but it's kinda. And so these are the sorts of things we want to try and avoid. Another problem I see, as I mentioned before, in athletes is caffeine intake. And there's this real challenge, and I'll finish off talking about it towards the end with, we know caffeine improves performance. We know athletes are going to do it. But what is the implication for sleep? And we've got to try and get that balance a little bit better. So this was one of my PhD students, Carissa Gardner. She's the sleep and caffeine queen now, and alcohol. Alcohol's not good either. Sorry to tell you. Sorry to give you all the bad news. This was a meta-analysis where she just looked at all the research and basically found, we know that we sort of expected this, that sleep duration would be lower when you'd consumed caffeine. But the interesting thing was that the quality of sleep drops. And that's not always something people register. Maybe it took me longer to fall asleep, 10 minutes. But not many people would register that your sleep quality is lower. And so then what we did was, a smart statistician, modelled it. And we thought, right, okay, let's see if we can give some cutoff times. When should you stop consuming caffeine if you want to have minimal influence on your nighttime sleep? So black tea, so just pretend you go to bed at 10 p.m. Black tea had no effect on sleep. You could consume it at almost any time prior to sleep. Only about 47 milligrams of caffeine in black tea. Coffee's more like 100 milligrams of caffeine in coffee. So we did some conservative estimates, and the cutoff time was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So consuming caffeine after 1 o'clock in the afternoon had a negative effect on sleep duration. The fun one was we modelled a pre-workout supplement, so about 200 milligrams of caffeine, and the cutoff time was about 9 o'clock in the morning. And so, of course, most people take pre-workouts in the afternoon. And most athletes and I'm sure most of us in this room consume caffeine in the morning, but I'm seeing a real trend for athletes to consume caffeine for training sessions, for hard sets. Swimmers very commonly. And again, I'll talk about that towards the end. Won't bore you to death with all the numbers here, but just to say that alcohol's not good for REM sleep. And unfortunately, this message has gotten out there that alcohol kind of helps you sleep, helps you fall asleep. And it does, but it really interferes with your overall quality of sleep, particularly REM sleep. So this is more of Chris's work that should be out fairly soon. But to try and make it really simple, we explained it in standard drinks. And basically we found that, yes, it does help you fall asleep quicker, shorter sleep onset latency. So you have some drinks, it helps you fall asleep quicker, but it also impairs your REM sleep. But the interesting thing is you have to have a lot more wine, not more alcohol. I drink wine, can you tell? Yeah, I have to have a lot more wine to actually help me fall asleep, but it doesn't take much to damage your sleep. So you have to have a lot of wine to actually influence how quickly you fall asleep, but you only need a little bit for it to mess up your sleep. So the negatives outweigh the very small positives that you may see from alcohol consumption. And it is the most commonly used non-drug method for people to thinking that it helps them sleep. What about women? I sort of think back, and I think, you know, at the AIS we worked with just as many female and male athletes, but I was doing some work with this is like 2018 with the US women's soccer team, and they said, "Oh, what happens to sleep across the menstrual cycle?" And I was like, well, I should probably know this, and I don't. So I looked at the research, again, nothing in athletes. So we've just started a whole series of research trying to understand what happens to sleep across the menstrual cycle. And this was in a UK Super League team, women's soccer team. This is their number of symptoms across the cycle, which you'll actually notice is low. These were a really well-managed group of athletes. But when you look at what happens to sleep across the cycle, nothing. There was almost no change in any of the sleep metrics that we measured. These were healthy, fit women who had their, and these were all the athletes who were naturally cycling. So none of these athletes were on contraceptives. The thing we did find, though, is on those occasions where the players had higher symptoms, then they had more disturbed sleep. But it was there was nothing to do with the day of the cycle. It was all to do with where the symptoms occurred, which makes total sense. We've got some work going on now with the Queensland Academy of Sport where we're looking at female athletes who have menstrual cycle dysfunction. So if you've got some kind of dysfunction, maybe it's endometriosis, PCOS, some aspect that may cause pain, may cause unusual menstrual cycles or disturbance in cycles, I think that's where we might see some issues with sleep, but soon to be found out. What about napping? And it's funny, I was saying earlier that I've been getting up early to watch the swimming and I keep thinking I'm going to nap in the afternoon. Doesn't happen. So napping, there's 3 types. There's the prophylactic nap, which is the nap taken in anticipation of sleep loss. So that might be what a football player may do the day of a game. Potentially, they might be doing that to prep for the game, but they may also be like, oh, no, I'm not going to sleep much. Then this is like, I call this the Sunday afternoon nap. The nap taken when you've had a drop of not as much sleep as you'd like. And then there's the appetitive nap, which is the nap that you just take because you can, you're bored, or you enjoy it. They're not great. The replacement nap is definitely the most common nap that we see in athletes. So they're sleep deprived for whatever reason. Maybe it's travel, maybe it's a late night match, and they sleep. Now, and this is a summary of all the research that was done to date prior to 2021. And we basically found that taking a nap in this window between 1 and 4 was good for pretty much everything that we measured that was related to athletes' performance. The only time we see that napping can be bad is if it's too late. So if it's between 4 and 8 in the evening or afternoon, that can decrease your nighttime sleep. So you don't have as much sleep pressure built up, so you don't sleep as well. There's the odd negative up here, and that's often when they woke people up and then asked them to do a performance effort. So it was like too close. Now in the real world, that would be very unlikely to happen. Most would have warm-ups, would have travel, would have coaches talking to them. But that's this idea that you probably need about 30 minutes after you've woken up before you're going to do a performance effort. So napping is good if you're sleep deprived. I wanted to talk a little bit about monitoring tools, because I always say it's really interesting that you can, like, not many athletes will go out and buy some forced decks, or not many athletes will go out and buy, maybe they might buy power meters, but you can go out as an athlete and buy a piece of kit that's going to tell you a lot of information, and you can just buy these off the internet. And you probably see I've got two on. I've got two devices I wear, and I pay for all our devices. There's no financial disclosures that I need to make here. We use Aura, and I have an Apple Watch, and I just do it just to stay up to date with the kind of tech. I certainly don't get super into the data, but there's lots of different ways you can measure sleep. There's nearables, so they're near you, they're not attached to you. So there's ones under the bed. We'll all know the Fitbit, Whoop. Then of course there's also apps, and there's now different sort of single channel EEG devices as well. So I'm sure you've all heard of polysomnography, or that's how, the gold standard of measuring multi-state sleep. That's where you get your REM, your non-REM sleep. We've used for years these activity monitors, research grade ones made by Philips. Unfortunately, they don't make them anymore. And part of the reason they don't make them anymore and don't provide any service for these devices anymore, which is a real bummer, is because people are moving to wearables. So there's just not the market anymore. You can ask people questionnaires, diaries and questionnaires to get a whole lot of information if they're honest. And then you have these wearable devices now, like particularly Whoop and Aura, which are really a combination of almost all of these. Now, what we know from these devices is that they are put two-state sleep in green, because they measure that we're comfortable. They measure that just as well as a research grade device. They don't measure multi-state sleep as well. So they don't measure REM sleep, deep sleep, which is the challenge when an athlete wants to know how much deep sleep they've got. I'm like, well, I don't even know what we do about it if you've got not much deep sleep. So don't pay too much attention to this. Pay attention to this. So here's just some considerations, try to summarize as simply as I can. If I was to go and monitor sleep in an athlete, what were some of the things that I'd think about? The first one, and this gets talked about a lot, this idea of orthosomnia, that if you're measuring your sleep, it's going to cause stress and anxiety and actually cause you to have worse sleep because you're paying attention to the numbers and you get a bit anxious. It may cause comparison to other athletes if you've got athletes in a group wearing wearables, and excuses. Sorry, coach, can't train. Only got 12% deep sleep. We don't have a lot of research on this. We've got a study going at the moment in elite athletes just to try and find out letting them wear a sleep monitor. And then just for 6 months, and at the end, we're going to ask them a whole lot of questions. But I don't think this is as high as people make it out to be, but I'm not sure. But there will be definitely, if you've got a team of 20 athletes, I'd say you might have maybe 1 or 2 like this, who might have some issues with that. I want to know about the device. Does it measure two-state or multi-state sleep? Can you get access to the raw data? Most devices now are getting better at allowing that to happen. And do they have a validated algorithm? Now, unfortunately, we have to validate not the algorithms, essentially, well, kind of, but we validate the devices because we don't trust anyone. I think, but the difference between the Aura and Whoop, I think they're very, very similar. And the validation studies say they're very, very similar. Aura may be slightly better. It really depends on, do you want to wear a device around your finger or on your wrist? I think it almost comes down to that. I think one day Whoop will put the time on their device, and as soon as they put their time on their device, I think people might be more likely to wear it rather than wearing 2 watches. We've got to be careful. These things, data goes to the cloud. How secure and safe do we think the data are? The biggest issue is that they use a membership model, and you've got to pay for them even when you're not using them. So we've got 70 odd Aura rings. We might have 20 out for a study. We're paying per month per device for 50 that we're not using. And then they can go and update their software. And all of a sudden, oh, I'm getting more deep sleep. I wonder why, because their algorithms have changed. Aura have been really good in the app. You can toggle to old and new algorithms for a certain period of time. We have an Aura Teams system, so we can look and see, we can store the old data, we can run the algorithms on the new data, we can access the raw data through there as well, which is great. We have to think about feedback, of course. There's user-friendly interfaces that these devices have. That athletes like them because they give you lots of stuff. They don't know what HRV is or whether it should be high or low, but it gives you lots of information. No, some do. Aura gives you the option to restrict data. So if you set up the team system, you can have the app and you can have the athlete only see what you want them to see, which I think helps with this here for some of them. And then they give you these recovery and readiness scores, and we know nothing about those. They're a black box. And then I think about, when are you going to do this monitoring? Are you going to do it during competition? I'd love that. Maybe the athletes wouldn't. Would you use it for a week, or could they be happy to just wear it like I do forever? And then we have to think about how much data they're getting, because my experience now is athletes, there's a lot of data there and they don't understand what the majority of it means. I will say, I may mention this in a moment, but Aura Ring does and Whoop do temperature. And if you're working with female athletes and they're naturally cycling and they do ovulate, you can see the change in temperature that occurs with ovulation. So it's a really nice way of actually separating into the follicular and luteal phases, if that's of interest. As I said, I have trust issues. And when you look at these devices, I think there's 3 things to sort of think of. And this has come from some of Marco Altini's work that he's done with HRV. So if anyone's interested, he's got some his blog is amazing. So I'm really comfortable with these wearables and their ability to measure sleep and wake, because it's based on activity. It's a measured thing. You're actually measuring it. And we can evaluate it really simply by comparing it to other quality devices, and we've got good science for it. But then they kind of go and they put all these other variables in, create an algorithm and give us sleep stages. We know they're not as good because they're estimating a known outcome. So they're trying to give us sleep stages, and it's harder to validate. You need to be in a sleep lab, electrodes on the scalp, and other measurements. And then they have these readiness and recovery scores. Then they're estimating not a known outcome, but an unknown outcome. And these are algorithms, we don't know how they're made. They're probably calculated off 20-year-old Silicon Valley techs that created the algorithms and that work for these companies, not based on athletes. And it's almost impossible to evaluate these. So you'd have to do some kind of training study in real athletes to actually validate whether these readiness and recovery scores are real. So I'm really comfortable with sleep-wake on wearables. I say sleep stages, compare to yourself over time. Look for big changes, look for big patterns. Maybe don't compare between individuals and probably don't compare to the gold standard. Readiness and recovery scores, take with a grain of salt. And just before I just finish off with some little recent observations, we can assess, so if you're trying to optimize sleep, you can just ask some simple questionnaires. There's some athlete questionnaires that are available to do a bit of a sleep screen. You can monitor sleep if you want to. Maybe you pick the ones that have issues. Maybe you're able to look at a whole group of athletes. Of course, we need to give feedback. I refuse to monitor sleep on an athlete if I'm not in a position to give feedback. And sometimes that has to be in a report. Sometimes I much prefer one-on-one because then you can really dig in and try and understand what's going on. Education is really important. I say athlete specific because I've seen people come in and give education to a group of athletes and say, you really got to go to bed at the same time and wake up at the same time, and you've lost them because most of them can't do it. Even though we know it's really important, it has to be specific to that group of athletes. Home audits, these are interesting. Obviously, to go into an athlete's house, you need permission, and you need to have a pretty serious conversation about it, but it can be very, very valuable. Because often they won't, because the way people have slept is often the way they've slept their whole life. So a recent soccer player I was talking to a few weeks ago, grew up, single mum, large number of kids. He slept on the couch. He slept on the couch his whole life. Now when he travels with a Premier League team, he wants to sleep on the couch. He just does not sleep well in a bed. And so trying to transition him now to getting good sleep in a bed. But no one would think that, right? No one would think that may be the case. We also know that, sleep is a social justice issue, right? So there are many people that don't sleep in cool, dark, quiet and safe rooms. So I think to assume that everyone's got a nice bed and a nice room environment is incorrect. And then if you're going to be somewhere for a decent period of time, like an Olympic Village or a hotel, you might want to go in there and sleep-proof the rooms, make the windows dark, etc. Travel with earplugs, eye masks, etc. And then you probably have to do things a number of times because athletes forget or go back to their old habits. So these are my 5 tips. I've sort of covered these. Timing, consistent bed and wake time is important. Not staying up late for something you wouldn't get up early for. So if it's important enough, you'll wake up early for it, not stay up late. So I often say to athletes, if they're watching two episodes of Netflix on something and going to bed late, I'm like, would you set your alarm 2 hours early to do that? They go, no. I was like, well, sleep is sleep is sleep. So if you wouldn't set your alarm early in the morning to get up for it, maybe don't stay up late for it, past your normal bedtime. If you watch 2 episodes of Netflix and you still go to bed at 10 o'clock, I don't care. But if you're going to bed at 10 o'clock and then you're watching 2 episodes of Netflix, that's a little different. Be okay with the things that don't go your way. Sometimes this don't have an influence on when a match starts, where you've got to travel to, what time you've got to travel. And so to help athletes sort of stay a little bit calm, you can't always get what you want. But then we need to be careful about the things that you can be careful about and that may get in the way. Stress, anxiety, managing that is good. Caffeine, alcohol, social media and gaming. Gaming for male athletes is getting increasingly large. And technology. So it's all about what you do with that technology. And I thought I'd just finish with 2 little slides here. Before Paris, I sat down with a number of Queensland Academy of Sport athletes, priority athletes, to just chat about their sleep and recovery plans. And I noticed a few things when it comes to sleep. In the swimmers, high caffeine intakes, as I said, especially in for main sessions that start at like 3 o'clock, they absolutely know that they're going to have issues with sleep from that amount of caffeine, but they're prioritising a training session, a high intensity, a main set over their sleep. And some of them are also practicing, which I get, practicing for the Olympics, 100%. But this question of, definitely use it in the Olympics, definitely know what you need to do, but every main set training session, 2 to 3 nights a week of disturbed sleep because of caffeine, I don't know the answer. High caffeine intakes during competition followed by sleeping medication, not always having the sleeping medication, but having it there in case they need it. maybe due to other things as well. I can imagine it's pretty difficult if you've just won a Olympic gold medal and then you get drug tested. Can you imagine trying to sleep and then back up for a heat the next morning? It would be very, very difficult. So sleeping medication is common. Long naps, super long naps, because they're just not sleeping at night because they're getting up so early. And then part of the reason then they have to sleep during the day, which they can be excessively long naps, and they need the naps because the sleep at night's so short. Some of them are like, oh, sleep's really important. I heard someone talk about sleep, so I'm going to go to bed at 8 o'clock tonight. Trying to force sleep doesn't work. If you're not sleepy, you're not going to fall asleep. You can't force it. So some were trying to force it. Gaming was particularly popular, as I said, in some of the male athletes. Lack of consistency, sleep onset and sleep offset. So bedtimes and wake times all over the place. For some, I completely understand it. Looking for external solutions without identifying a cause. So, oh, I'm going to take this, I'm going to take this melatonin, or I'm going to take this. I'm like, well, why? What's the reason why you're not sleeping well? Can we fix that before you go and try and take something external? And then going, yeah, I tried that. Maybe they tried it for a day or 2 nights and it doesn't work. But what about the people that work with athletes? What are some of the things that I think we need to think about? Who owns sleep, right? So if you work in a multi-disciplinary team, is there someone that takes charge of that? Is it a psychologist? Is it a physiologist? Is it a doctor? It could be a dietitian. There could be a range of people that are involved in it, but who's going to take it and lead it? Because I think what happens is everyone goes, it's not my area. And then nobody looks after it. And it's hard because not everyone has someone that has the expertise to work with the team. Sometimes we don't have this multidisciplinary team approach, where I would not like to be talking to an athlete about caffeine and sleep without their dietitian there, right? Because I don't want to say something, I don't want to contradict. The swimmers in Queensland work with Greg Cox. Like, he's one of the best dietitians in the world. I'm not going to be like, what are you doing? I'd like us to sit down and try to make a plan. Some of them monitoring sleep, but not really understanding what some of these caveats and contexts are. So we need to understand, if athletes are measuring it, we need to understand it. And people get their source of information from sleep from lots of different places. And if we can influence when we schedule training and travel, and I absolutely agree there are times we need early morning training sessions, but I do think it would be interesting to rethink how early we need these sessions to really be. Because it doesn't matter what you do, whether you're an athlete or non-athlete, early morning training starts are not great. And I think this might be the last one. I've definitely gone in and chatted to athletes, and they've talked to other people, and they've got a list of like 8 things they have to do before they go to bed. I'm going to have this cup of tea, and then I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do this breathing exercise, and they've got this list of stuff, and they have not gone and understood what the issue was and why are they not sleeping like they should. Oh, and last one. I see this more in professional teams where they're like, yeah, we're monitoring sleep. I'm like, are you really? It's like a ticker box to say that we're looking after the welfare of the team because we're measuring sleep, and often they're not really doing it to a decent extent. So thank you to our collaborators and the people that pay my salary, and people that give us research money. Thanks.
Thank you, Shona. I had a lot of nods and yeses and during that talk, and I'm sure many in the audience did as well. I'm not certain of question time. I just had the finger pointed at me, but we have a roaming mic with Noah at the back. So if you do have a question, please raise your hand and Noah or myself will run over. Kenneth at the back has one.
Shona, you presented information on the positive impact of napping earlier in the afternoon, negative later in the afternoon.
Yeah.
What's the story for napping in the morning, so that 8 to 12 window?
Yeah, I think and as you know, a lot of swimmers do that. A lot of people with early morning starts do that. I think that's even better. But that was a summary of research. And of course, no one's done the research to nap in the morning because people are like, what? Who would nap in the morning? But yeah, if a swimmer says to me, I get up, I do this, I train, I do a gym set, and then I go straight home to bed, I'm like, awesome, because then you've got more hours till bedtime. So yeah, I think it's excellent. Yeah. Hi. Hello.
Sorry, Chinwei,
Sorry, thank you. With the morning naps, I think it depends on the amount of sleep that, because for someone who has not accumulated sufficient amount of that, it means that they will not be able to fall asleep to nap.
Yeah, 100% agree. And we talk about that in the swimmers mainly because we know they're so sleep deprived. So they're going to nap. They need to nap, but agree, if you're not sleep deprived, napping is only going to cause you issues with falling asleep and staying asleep.
I have another question. Is that okay?
Of course. Two more.
Proportions of the team sport athletes that you see suffer from sleep breathing disorders such as obstructive sleep apnea.
Yeah, that's a good one.
A lot.
Yeah, we've only done one study, and it was with, it's published, I can share, it was with the Brisbane Broncos. And there was a number of those players who were very mild. They were mild. We worked with a sleep physician and they didn't require treatment, but they were considered mild. So I think it might be a little bit higher than we think. You know, most people think it's, you know, middle-aged, overweight men, but I think we can see it in some athletes, and it was mainly due to the facial structure. That was the issue with some of these players. We did see it in a swimmer as well, and we found out that he had actually his was more like moderate sleep apnea because he wouldn't adapt at altitude. He just kept getting sick, couldn't cope at altitude. And so obviously that was triggering a lot of his sleep apneas because of the high altitude. So I think it might be more common than we might think.
Thank you.
Before the next question, Shona, I just wanted to ask on that point, do you see coaches routinely screening for potential sleep apnea, thinking in the rugby and the sports where we have thicker necks? So the stop bang and the ESS are two really easy tools that you could use if you're coaching, just to see if there's complaints related that could indicate potential sleep apnea.
Yeah, don't see it very often.
Okay.
No.
I think Noah has handed on the mic. Please go ahead.
One question I had, in a lot of team sports, athletes are taking some form of caffeine prior to games, usually, 7, 8 o'clock at night, because they feel the need for that to perform. There's obviously then a detriment on their sleep. What would your recommendations be in that scenario?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And where I personally think that an athlete needs to do what they need to do to play well. And it's all well and good to have a team of brilliant sleepers, but no one's winning. So I think performance comes first, but I do think, especially if you're only playing once a week, right, they're going to sleep badly after a match anyway, after a game. So maybe not the biggest deal, but I do think where we can help is that many elite players probably take more caffeine than is required for a performance benefit, and that they could maybe titrate the dose down a little bit or work with, a dietitian to kind of optimize the amount of caffeine, because they might be having more than they actually need. Yeah.
Thanks, Shona. I have been given so question time is over. However, there is a networking event. So Molly, hold your question if you're still around after, please. And anyone else that would like to ask Shona, just ask you again for a round of applause. That was wonderful.
To be fair, it was more of a down at this level. It wasn't a head cut. Thank you very much, Shona. It was terrific. With that, I'd like to call upon our second speaker, who is Mr. Anthony Eddy. Anthony has over 20 years experience as a sports administrator and coach working within high performance sport. And we have the good fortune of him joining Sydney University Sport and Fitness about this time last year. Yeah, as their high performance manager. So thank you, Anthony.
think that's on now. Here's your chance for your afternoon nap. And if you do fall asleep, you can use concussion as an excuse. So I'm just going to speak to you a little bit about Sydney University Sport and the high performance programs that we run here. So the organisation itself has 39 affiliated sporting clubs, countless participation programs, 11 high performance programs, which I won't go through all of them, hundreds of sporting scholarships for students at Sydney University, and elite athlete program that supports over 300 students. So just to give you a bit of an idea of I suppose the mission or the vision of the high performance program here at Sydney University, we were ideally to be recognised in Australia as the centre of sporting excellence, with the University of Sydney and Sydney Uni sporting clubs programs being the institution of choice for high achieving and talented athletes. That would be a wonderful ambition, and we're still striving to achieve that. It's a very competitive market. I won't go through all of these points, but you can have a bit of a read while I'm babbling along out here. As I said, it's an extremely competitive market in the university sector, and also for just high achieving sportsmen and women. So we're doing our best, but as I said, it's difficult all the time. The second last point, just I think it's worth mentioning that the university itself has a strategic plan through to 2032, and Sydney Uni Sport is aligned to that program because we obviously are affiliated with the university, and then we're trying to have our clubs aligned to Sydney University's sporting programs as well. So the aim is just to try and make as much alignment as possible from the lowest of the clubs right to the elite clubs or the high performing clubs that support the vision and the strategy of the university itself. Maintaining quality control is a challenge because a number of sports are reasonably independent and they don't always have to have university students playing for them, but they are associated with Sydney Uni Sports. So it's important that we do maintain quality control around what the programs do. And also it just fosters the collaboration and creates a fantastic learning environment within our own organisation. We conduct a series of like a monthly coaches meetings for our high performance programs, have different guest speakers, also have the clubs present their own strategies around what might be recruitment or retention, how they target specific athletes from schools or other universities to come and represent here at the university. Leveraging the expertise of world-class researchers and the university. So again, the aim, still working on it, but again, to try and work really closely with the university because it's a highly ranked university in the world. And if we can leverage, or if the sporting clubs can leverage from the research that's been going on at this university for a number of years, and particularly probably within this building here, I think that Sydney Uni Sport can help the faculty here and other faculties, but also the faculties themselves can help Sydney University Sport. And that's something that is very close to me and something that I'll continue to work on while I'm continuing to do this position. Provide opportunities and pathways for students whose goals is to work in the high performance sports environment, be that as an athlete or in a support role. So, physiotherapy students to have practical experience within the Sydney University sports programs themselves, exercise physiology students as well, doctors, whatever it might be, that can still support the sports programs by actually being linked and associated really closely with our own programs is, to me, just a win-win situation, and something that I think we can continue to work closer together with each other and leverage from each other around how we can do that. Brisbane 2032 creates an enormous amount of opportunities, I believe, for this university and also for our sporting programs. But just to give you an example there's other universities and organisations that are very closely associated with national sporting organisation or state sporting organisations, whereas we probably aren't. But the QUT has very close association with QAS swimming. Wollongong have just developed a women's high performance program. Bond are linked with Loughborough around research and everything else. And then I've just, highlighted here the fact, Sydney University, yes, well, we do have endless opportunities, but from a sporting perspective, it's us trying to work, or Sydney Uni Sport trying to work with the university to find out what these opportunities are going forward. The vision, as I said, it's already highlighted up there, but these are the things that we try to cover through our elite athlete program and our high performance clubs in itself. I've sort of highlighted through here some of these areas. We don't do a great deal of, well, there's a lot of research around talent identification and everything else, but even with talent identification within the university in our high performance programs, we go out and recruit, but then once somebody gets injured, they may be able to go and represent Australia in another sport, or somebody who doesn't achieve at rugby the way they thought they might have, or on Aussie rules the way they thought they might have when they left school and they came here to represent Sydney University, could suddenly be thrown into a boat and be dragged off to Brisbane 2032. But they're things that we don't do, but we'd like to do. And again, potentially the support of faculties and the university itself might be things that we can, again, benefit the athletes that we've got in our programs to go and represent at the highest level. Nutrition is something that we provide a service for. Athletic performance is we provide the service for. These other ones over here are areas where I think we could still work closer with different faculties and our own organisation, our own sporting organisations and clubs that we have. But performance analysis is something that I think you'd be familiar. They have a lot of performance analysis courses over in Europe and the US and everything else, but there's probably a lot of sporting analysts come from Europe over here to actually do the job in our own sporting organisations. Whereas again, if we could run something here working with the likes of a Huddle or a Sports Code or whatever it might be, or within this faculty around the high performance major itself, we might be able to set up a lab somewhere where students can come in and code games for all our sporting teams, deliver that out to the coaches and the programs on a Sunday evening, and then the coaches' job's a lot more easy to be able to provide a high performance environment for the athletes that they're dealing with. Unfortunately, we're not there yet, but it's an area still that we're delving into to try and provide that opportunity at some stage for the students that are actually studying here, to give them the opportunity then to go and work with a national sporting organisation or a state sporting organisation or a world-class team in that space at some stage. Just the core features of the vision around the high performance program. So again, just alignment and the management systems is really important. Setting a clear direction and policy, overseeing the implementation of the programs, as I said, just again, providing that quality control. We don't want any rogue agents out there doing what they think is in the best interests of, might be their club, rather than what they're doing with representing Sydney University Sport or the university itself. And then also we do employ some of the key personnel within those high performance programs. The measuring impact, clear high performance agreements, KPIs, target events agreed on with each of the sports, measurement across the performance on individual basis for all people working across the performance system. And as you all know, in any sort of high performance environment, just keeping people accountable for the delivery of their service. One team was mentioned before around a multidisciplinary approach. Again, it's important that we have a common philosophy, regular meetings to share information, challenging environment where you can actually question things, and an alignment of a high performance principles in achieving the agreed outcomes that we're looking towards. Always an athlete-centered approach, which most programs are. And again, just the research focus for me is a huge opportunity for us around, the program itself and the research on key issues. may not, similar to some of the studies that have been spoken about here today, I think we could still utilise our own programs rather than external programs to provide a service to the faculties and the university itself. Monitoring of injuries profiles across programs is a huge area as well, which I think we could delve into some research opportunities as well, and best practice. So that's me, short and sharp. My apologies.
Thank you, Anthony. Now, I'm going to steal the first question. We have time for one or two. But what is it that you would like or need most from an academic in the room here to get some of this work up and running?
Great question. And again, I think the idea with the opportunity just to be able to have several meetings and conversations and look at what the academic or the faculty needs around their own research, and then be in a position where, we can actually put a program together that helps service that, and we get a win-win on both situations, because we have a ready-made facility from a testing perspective. We have ready-made athletes that would be and coaches and programs that would be quite willing to put their hand up and assist in any of those areas where research would be required. And ultimately, the club themselves and the athletes would get the benefit just from the technology and the research that's being done.
All right. Thank you very much, Anthony. So you're going to be around for the next, yeah, perfect. So anybody in the room who would like to follow up on any of those opportunities can reach out to Anthony during the networking drinks. Thank you. And you're next. Oh, there we go. Oh, I've got a different run sheet down here. So with that, I'd like to introduce our third speaker, who is Dr. Melissa Wilson. I would also like just to point out that I supervised Melissa's honours project 20 years ago, at which point Melissa liked to make a great effort to point out on a weekly basis that she was a jock and I was a nerd. And so it's with great pleasure that I introduce Melissa and her PhD, now Head of Pathways at Paralympics Australia. Okay, Melissa.
Kieran, yes, it is true that I learnt to embrace my inner nerd, and it's such a thrill to be invited to be back here at University of Sydney, although I am disappointed that we're not out at Cumbo today, because I have very fond memories of that place. And as Kieran said, I am a University of Sydney alumni. I graduated 19 years ago from the Exercise and Sports Science program. And Kieran was not my only honours supervisor. My other honours supervisor was also Kenneth Graham, who is also in the room today. And I recognise some other of my lecturers from back in the day as well, which is very exciting. But I did want to say that my honours research was quite different to what I'm about to present on today. It was actually looking at creatine supplementation on repeat sprint performance in butterfly and breaststroke swimmers. And so in doing my research, we handed out many little tubs of creatine or placebo samples to athletes. And I was trying to be very environmentally friendly. And so I said to Kieran one day, what do we do with all of these empty tubs? And he said to me, make me something. So there's also a very other special guest here today. And this is what is left of a 19-year-old creatine man who I made a life-size skeleton of a person made out of empty creatine bottle samples that has survived the move from Cumbo to main campus here, although has lost his body. And I was reunited with Creatine Man today. So a very special guest that I would just like to pop here to also enjoy my talk. I'm wasting very precious time. So my name is Melissa Wilson, and I am the General Manager of Classification and Pathways at Paralympics Australia. Today, I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the barriers to entry and progression that para-athletes face in getting involved in parasport and realising their dreams of becoming a Paralympian. So the best way for me to demonstrate this is to let you hear from the athletes themselves.
Most people only saw my barriers instead of working with me to break them.
People told me no and underestimated me.
People said I'd never make it.
I never thought I'd be able to play sport again.
A few years ago, I had next to nothing in terms of support.
I love to show everyone, hey, I can do this and don't underestimate me.
Imagine what we can do in Paris 2024.
It's been 40 years since the perfect 10.
The first time in the history of the sport, a perfect 10.
You're just in awe. You want to replicate the exact same thing, but it is very difficult. And that's why she's the only one that has gotten it.
You have to give Nadia a tremendous amount of the credit for the boom of American female gymnastics.
It was heroic what she did and the risks that she took.
By the time when I got to defect, I think that was the only time in my adult life when I had no fear.
I'm on. While we wait for that, I would also just like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land in which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and in particular pay respects to the 14 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have represented Australia at the Paralympic Games to date. And we look forward to a few more joining those ranks in the next 21 days before the Paralympic Games starts in Paris. I was hoping today to present to you a little bit of research that Paralympics Australia has been conducting with the Australian Sports Commission around the barriers to entry and progression for para-athletes that have been looked into as part of the Australian Sports Commission Win Well strategy, which is ensuring that we have the right systems and processes in place to enable our best ever games in 2032. And best ever games in 2032 is going to be measured by the number of athletes on teams, the number of medals we win, the number of athletes winning medals, and also a number of win well measures, which is around diversity and inclusion. There we go. So as we prepare for the next 21 days to the Paris 2024 Paralympic Games and then on to Brisbane in 2032, I wanted to point out that the role of Paralympics Australia is actually a little bit different to the role of the Australian Olympic Committee. And we don't just deliver a team to the Games at Paralympics Australia. Our remit involves helping Australians with disability to participate in sport and compete at the Paralympic Games, as well as through competition opportunities in Australia, through forming partnerships with government, business, sporting bodies, and the community. We do what we do because we believe that sport has the power to change the world. And as an organisation, we exist to lead Paralympic sport and to use Paralympic sport to create a more inclusive world. And as I said, we're here to create the most successful era of Paralympic sport in Australia as we led to a home games in 2032. There we go. Can I just get a little show of hands in the room? And this is not a judgment, this is not a test. I just want to understand who would say that they are as knowledgeable about the Paralympic Games and Paralympic sport as you are Olympic sport? Okay, just a couple, great. Because what I've chosen to do today, the research I was going to present is largely still embargoed, actually. I was hoping the report would be out by today, but it isn't. I do have a snapshot of the research coming up, but what I can tell you is that the #1 barrier to entry and progression in para sport reported by athletes who have been able to successfully navigate the high performance system was a lack of understanding and awareness of para sport pathways, opportunities to get involved, opportunities to compete, classification, and how to support para athletes. And this lack of awareness and understanding existed in the general community, as well as within the high performance sports system. And in fact, 100% of role holders, so sport management in administration of sports science personnel who completed the questionnaire said that they didn't understand classification. These are high performance managers, high performance coaches saying they don't understand classification, which is the foundational cornerstone of the Paralympic movement. It is the mechanism by which we group athletes to create a fair and equitable playing field. So I'm going to take this opportunity today to enhance para-literacy of you guys as key contributors to the para-sport landscape within Australia. It is critically important for us, obviously, to upskill our high performance sports system and our community sports system around parasport and the role that it plays and the opportunities that exist. But the other two areas that are critically important for us to enhance knowledge about parasport are the allied health sector and the education sector, because those two sectors are areas in which individuals working in those areas have a very high percentage of a touch point with someone who could be a potential Paralympian, but doesn't actually know it or doesn't know how to connect them with parasport. So what is parasport? I'm going to tell you what parasport is not. And parasport is not the same as disability sport. So when I say parasport and when we talk about the Paralympic Games, parasport is used for sports that are recognised by the International Paralympic Committee. Paralympic sport is a term used for sports that offer a pathway to the Paralympic Games. That is different to disability or adaptive sport, which refers to sport programs that anybody with a disability can participate in. They may or may not lead to the Paralympic Games, but luckily we are seeing a lot more options in the disability and adaptive sport space. For example, wheelchair AFL, blind cricket or deaf sports, but these are just not para sports because they don't have a pathway to the Paralympic Games. My focus today is going to be on parasport. Also a very timely one. Paralympians are not Olympians. Paralympians compete at the Paralympic Games, which is very different to competing at the Olympic Games. They're not interchangeable. They're two separate events. And whilst you might think it is a compliment to call a Paralympian an Olympian because that's the highest echelon of sport, it is actually quite critical to the athlete and is disrespectful that they are not recognised as achieving the highest echelon within their own sport pathway. There's also no such thing as para-Olympians, a very common mistake. In fact, some of our emerging para-athletes are still learning this fact. We have some education to do with our own cohort. You may have seen the term Paralympics broadcast during one of our most well-known up-and-coming para-athletes who are due to compete at the Games, Alexa Leary, who was very excited, and her dad was very excited for her to go to the Paralympics. So yes, we have indeed some education with our own athletes and our parent cohort too. I see I've got a spelling mistake there, my apologies. There are currently 28 para sports. There are 22 summer para sports and 6 winter para sports. I say currently because there is actually one missing on here. A new sport has been added to the program for LA 2028, which is para climbing. So speed climbing, rock climbing. But I've kept it to the current 2022 sports because this is what you'll see in Paris in 21 days' time. 17 of these sports, the ones that are highlighted at the moment, are basically exactly the same as their Olympic counterpart. The rules are adapted, the equipment is slightly different, but you can very strongly recognise these 17 sports as being roughly the same as an Olympic sport. The others, there's one more. Powerlifting is a little bit like weightlifting, but it's the bench press only, or it's a little bit like the able-bodied equivalent of powerlifting, but it's the bench press only. And the other 4 sports, are specific to the Paralympic Games. So you will only see these sports at the Paralympic Games, not the Olympic Games. And these are sports that are either for individuals with very low vision, who are blind or have very low vision, or who have significant impairment, typically in 4 or more limbs. On the winter side, we have 6 sports. All of these you will recognise from a very similar Olympic able-bodied counterpart. Again, just slightly different rules, slightly different equipment. Who can participate in parasport? We have 3 impairment categories. There are events for individuals with a physical impairment. So 25 of the 28 parasports are available to those with a physical impairment. And there are particular impairments that are eligible for a Paralympic pathway. So muscle weakness, joint restriction, limb deficiency, leg length difference, short stature, and coordination impairments. Vision impairment is offered in 12 of the 28 sports, and just 3 of the 28 sports offer a competition category for athletes with an intellectual impairment. And there's quite strict criteria around the intellectual impairment, meaning that you have to have presence at an IQ below 75, as well as documented evidence of social and cognitive dysfunction diagnosed before the age of 18. There are a lot of impairments that are 100% disabilities, but are not eligible to participate in parasport. And some of the most common types where people say, why can't I go to the Paralympic Games? Because they're not recognised as eligible impairments, significant pain, hearing impairment, transplant recipients, some sort of psychological diagnosis like PTSD, and autism and Down syndrome don't qualify in the intellectual impairment category at the moment either. The other interesting thing is, of all those 28 sports, not all sports offer a Paralympic pathway for all types of impairments. So some sports are only for vision impairment, some sports are only for physical impairment, some offer all three. So all the sports here in yellow offer a pathway for athletes with a physical impairment. We've got a few sports that offer the pathway for a vision impairment. And as I said, just 3 sports that offer a pathway for athletes with an intellectual impairment. In winter sports, all sports are available for athletes with a physical impairment, 3 with a vision impairment, but no sports available at the Winter Paralympic Games for athletes with an intellectual impairment. So what is classification? As I said before, classification is the foundational cornerstone of the Paralympic movement. Without classification, we do not have Paralympic sport. If you look at these 2 pictures, do you think that it would be fair for these 2 athletes to compete in the long jump against each other? One is wearing 2 prosthetic limbs, one is wearing 1. So if they were to compete against each other in the same competition, one would have an unfair advantage over the other. So classification determines who is eligible to compete, who they compete against, and it works by grouping athletes whose impairments cause similar limitations to their sport. So it's very much the same as other methods that are used to create fairness, like weight classes, dividing by age in children's sport, and by male and female sex divisions as well. And because each sport requires different biomechanics and different movements, the classification system for each sport is different. So if you're undergoing classification, you are required to undergo classification for each individual sport. The process to determine eligibility, though, is the same. And that process is that the athlete has to show medical evidence that they have one of those eligible impairment types. Then they present to a classification panel where they undergo what's essentially like a physio bench test to understand how their impairment impacts their ability to perform fundamental movement skills. You then progress to a sport-specific technical assessment where he's assessed how your impairment affects your ability to perform the fundamental movement skills of the sport. And after that, you're also observed in competition. This is a little bit of a fail-safe measure to make sure that people are actually presenting to their best ability during the classification process to ensure that it is as accurate as possible. A little bit of education for you to become armchair experts during the games. A classification is awarded to an athlete for a specific sport, and your classification is generally, in most cases, a letter followed by a number. The letter indicates the sport, and the number indicates the type and the level of impairment. So Brendan Hall here is a swimmer, so his classifications start with an S. He has an S9 classification. The higher the number, the less the impairment. The lower the number, the greater the impairment. So Brendan is an S9, it's a relatively high number, which means his level of impairment is relatively low. Danny DeToro, she is a table tennis player. She has a classification of TT4, table tennis 4. Samuel Harding is a triathlete with a vision impairment. So PT for paratriathlon, VI2. Vision impairment has 3 classes, so he's kind of got so-so vision. He's not completely blind, but he does still need a guide, as you can see, to run with him. Madison De Rosario, she's a T53. So on the track, her classification is 53. And the 53 class is for athletes who use a wheelchair to race, and so on and so forth. Team sports use a slightly different classification system where they use a point score. And so the lower the number, the greater level of impairment. And so here is an example from wheelchair rugby, where your classification ranges from a 1.0 to a 3.5. And in order to create that fair and equitable playing field during a particular match, teams must play with their combination of players, their collective point score, must be below 8 in this case for wheelchair rugby. So that's how we make sure that teams are roughly playing to the same level of impairment on the court. Parasport high performance environment, I mentioned this before. We are on a quest as an Australian sports system to produce the best games ever in 2032, as measured by number of medals, medalists, the breadth of sports winning medals, and wellbeing measures of diversity inclusion, and also perceptions of the Australian community, which is also why it's really important for us to educate as many people as possible on what parasport is. To get to best games ever in 2032, as a parasport system, we've got quite a long way to go. Our best games ever to date were Sydney 2000, where we had 286 team members. We won 149 medals, and they were from 96 medalists. To get to best games ever, we just got to pump that up a little bit. So we need to get to 300 medals, 300 team size, 150 medals, and from 100 athletes. Tokyo was about half that. And little spoiler alert, just between you and me in this room, we still have one more team to be announced to the Paralympic Games team, but the team size for Paris 2024 is even smaller. And our performance trajectory suggests that this could be one of our worst Paralympic Games since Barcelona. So as a system, we have a lot of ground to make up in order to reach our best games ever in 2032. And this is where I want your help. This is the number of athletes that we currently have in the Australian sports system who are categorised, so who are recognised as high performance athletes in our high performance sports system. So athletes are categorised and they receive a level of performance support and funding based on their level of categorisation. A podium on the left, down to emerging on the right. The green bars are our Olympic pathway, so you can imagine a bigger base leading to a smaller number of athletes at the top. When it comes to para athletes, our numbers are really small and that pipeline is inverted. So we only have very few athletes sitting in the pathway at the bottom at the moment. And so those are our 2032 athletes. So if we sort of flip that graph on its side and create the a pyramid, this is the pyramid of athletes currently in the system who could be Brisbane athletes at the bottom of the pyramid. This is for the Olympic pathway. So our Paris athletes are at the top, our LA athletes are in the middle, our Brisbane athletes down the bottom. And this is to scale what it looks like for para athletes. So we need your help to help us find and support the next generation of Paralympians because it's looking pretty light. Some of the areas in which you can help are based on what we found in this survey of barriers to entry and progression in parasport for high performance para athletes. This was the response rate for this survey was the highest ever reported by the Australian Sports Commission. Of all of the surveys, the Australian Sports Commission loves a survey. Of all of the surveys they have ever done, this one had the highest response rate because para athletes and those working in parasport are so passionate about the inequities that exist in the sports system. And over 160 unique barriers to entry and progression were identified. And they can largely be broken down into 6 areas. Access to classification and high performance opportunities, limited to no coaching depth, fit for purpose training environments that are accessible, poor paraliteracy of key role holders, as I've been talking about, access to national and international competition just doesn't exist, and accessibility challenges for athletes with higher support needs. So how can you help? We want you, I'm sorry, the text has come out very small, but I'll make sure that you have these slides. We want you to join us to create the most successful era in Paralympic history. So I've got some links on these slides. First of all, you can join the Aus Squad, which is our Paralympics Australia newsletter to stay up to date with all things parasport, all the news, particularly coming into games time. You'll be up to date with all the latest results, profiles on athletes, as well as upcoming events that we've got after the games. For those of you who may work in allied health, we also have an allied health referrer network where we provide education opportunities so that you as an allied health provider, when working with your clients, are knowledgeable to refer your clients into parasport opportunities. And there's also opportunities as an allied health provider to become involved in parasport as a classifier or as a support team member. You can join the movement as a classifier or a coach. You can incorporate para-specific content into your education curriculums. And as researchers, you can help build a base of evidence to help us better understand and better inform participation and performance pathways in parasport. There's also an opportunity to become the host of quite bespoke para-specific training environments in the university of setting. There's a couple of examples happening in Queensland at the moment. There's a swimming program in particular for swimmers with significant impairments, high-level cerebral palsy. There's a dedicated swimming program which uses the university sports science and allied health students to service those athletes and support their medical needs as well as their performance needs. And last but not least, shameless plug, and it's I didn't mean for this to be highlighted in bigger text than the rest of it, but we also are a registered charity and we very much need your support. Part of the inequities in the parasport high performance system have been the product of a very limited resource. We were very fortunate in receiving quite a significant government investment recently, but it's still not enough. And so I encourage you to buy your virtual seat for the Paris 2024 Paralympic Games and support our Paralympic team. It's a really cool environment for you to go in. You can buy a seat, you can get your name on a seat in the stadium and access behind the scenes special content as a supporter of our team. So sport has the power to change the world. This is a once in a generation opportunity to lead change in Australia, and we want you to be on this team with us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Melissa. And you've got time to hang around for networking after as well, too. Thank you, Melissa. All right, and so we have one more practitioner presentation, then we'll take a short break to stretch legs, go to the toilet and get ready before we have our final session. And so with that, I'd like to invite Mr. Scott Becker, current director for hockey at Sydney University Sport and Fitness. And I'll hand that one to you. Yeah, perfect.
Firstly, thanks for the opportunity to speak today. And just a little correction, it's Scott Barker, not Becker, so that's okay. Yeah, for me, it's just giving you an insight to the Sydney Uni hockey program. For me, I've been fortunate enough to coach at an international level, at a state level, and very much hands-on at a club level as well. And for me, my learnings is coaching a club team is probably the most challenging team I've ever coached. Okay, and you're probably sitting there saying, why is that the case? Well, you'll see here, we've got 16 athletes, and I guarantee every single one of them have got all end goals are completely different. You got 2 Olympians sitting there, you got Junior World Cup athletes sitting there, you got, pardon me, under 18s future athlete there as well. So trying to build a partnership and an end goal in a team with so many individual outcomes is quite challenging. So we do the best we can, but we've changed our focus a little bit to talk about athlete readiness. And that's our major focus to what is your benchmark event and how can we give you every opportunity to be in peak physical condition for your benchmark event, regardless if it's a junior, as I said, Junior World Cup or going to the Olympics. Just an insight to the hockey club. We've got 10 women's teams, 7 men's teams, 4 masters teams and 3 juniors. Okay, and the reason I put that in there because as you can see, there's a large amount of teams there and we only have 1 hockey pitch to train on. So all these teams are fighting for the same training facility at the same time. So it's quite challenging to get quality access turf time. And then we have to work around challenges to overcome those obstacles. Just an insight to the high performance program. So basically we're just trying to create a holistic environment. And I keep talking about athlete readiness and it's a transitioning out of the high performance club space into perhaps the NSWIS environment and or the national program. And we're really trying to close that gap between a club system to the next pathway or the next element to their career. One thing we find with hockey as well, it's probably a pass mark, but it's also disappointing from an aspect is we get them to the national team and they have to relocate to Perth. So basically it becomes a cycle of, we get them to Perth, job done, next one, bring them in and keep going. Okay, so this is the staff and in partnership with SUSF and working with Anthony and Leone is really around trying to get the athletes to buy into that high performance vision, okay? Some of you may recognize the background of that's the Cumbo gym being redesigned and put back into workable use and really a high performance gym where our athletes can come and do their gym sessions and within 2 minutes they can be doing stick and ball with us out at Cumbo. So I'm probably the last person standing at Cumbo. I've got an office there. So yeah, you can see our staff here. Got myself there as a director of hockey, and we've got the lead S&C, Andrew. We've got Jessica in charge of our women's S&C, and Harry was our men's S&C. Unfortunately, he's just moved on, Harry, to bigger and better things. So, yeah, also creating pathways for our staff members is super important. Just an insight to our club training. So basically, our men's and women's train twice a week, okay? The S&C guys take the physical performance program, yes, in conjunction, pre-planned with myself and the rest of the staff, more around loads and load management and what it looks like. The reason I put that in there, you'll see 2 sessions, 6:30 to 8:30 for both men's and women's. Unfortunately, if you're an elite athlete, that's not going to be enough. So we have to, as I said, overcome obstacles and challenges. And how can we create that athlete readiness and the transition into the elite space? Is now we create with the elite and the EAP athletes, we create an ITP. So we call that an individual training program. A lot of you would use the DTE, the daily training environment, but we use the ITP. So it's focusing singularly on the athlete only. Okay, what worked for this athlete might be completely different for a player over here. So it's very much individual focused. The physical performance by the S&C staff. Testing in alignment with Hockey Australia and their benchmarks. So once again, it's closing that gap for athlete readiness. So if they do end up in Perth, it's not overwhelming. They know what to expect. They know what the next outcome is going to be. The sports psychologist, sports nutrition, and on-pitch technical and tactical skill set with myself. So there's a number of elements there to, sounds very easy, but get the complete package at the end of their journey is giving them every opportunity to move forward. And on top of that, 90% of these are student athletes as well. So trying to control their academic support as well, and getting the balance right between their on-field performances and academic performances as well. And of course, the video analysis comes into it, GPS, which I'll talk more in a sec. Okay, this is an individual training program. I've blocked the player's name out here. Really, really good and really pleasing to hear about the sleep. Of course, my biggest learning is sleep is the best form of recovery is sleep. Yeah, if you go back probably 4 or 5 years in our coaching space, we'll try to get our athletes up as early as possible to get them on their activation, getting ready for game day readiness. Now, as coaches, our mindset shift is sleep first, build a program around their recovery. Okay, so you see here, this particular athlete on a Monday does a 4:30 to 5:30 session with me. It's a light session. There's some focus points and there's some objectives around that. Tuesday, she does a little bit of individual stuff with it. We've got Ben with one of our coaches who just creates quick hands. So another session for her there on a Tuesday, into the gym, into the Wednesday heavy session with myself, gym with sprint training, stretching, recovery. And the biggest thing you'll see here, that's replicated for a 12-week block leading into her benchmark event. Okay. And most of you are fully aware, athletes are routine driven. If something changes, they kind of lose what's happening, losing focus. So they're very much focused on what their roles and responsibilities are and what's their training block look like. And over on the right, you'll see the sports psychologist minimum once a month and a sports dietitian as well. So it's a holistic program around the well-being of the athlete. Yeah, so I just touched on the physical performance. We work closely with Hockey Australia, and we're fortunate enough that one of our former S&Cs at Sydney Sport and Fitness was the lead S&C at Hockey Australia. So we're able to build that relationship around getting their testing batteries to what it looks like to become an elite athlete, from the GPS data, from the height speed meters to the total distance. And we replicate that in a club system, which is quite impressive, because I don't think any other club in Australia would have that access to it. So you can see here, they've got the physical performance benchmark from Hockey Australia, and it's broken up into a number of categories there. You've got the development athlete into the talent performance, and the far left ones, the international athletes here. And you can see their benchmarks. So once again, when they do transition into the NSWIS environment and or Hockey Australia environment, this is all common knowledge for them. It's not new, it's not overwhelming, it's not become a bit of a shock for them. They know where they need to be, but it also gives them something to aspire to hit their targets. And whether it's a 12-month plan, 2-year plan, they've got benchmarks where they need to get to. This is the GPS data for a game for us in hockey. So for us, it's 68 minutes, and you can see the distance there, the total distance, and it varies on positions on how much running, and obviously game time as well. But most athletes run around between 6.5 Ks per game. Okay, in hockey we've got rolling subs, so basically they can come off, they can have a 2-minute break, and then they're straight back on. And it's just the concept from a coaching is, you had that break, your job's to make an impact as you enter that field straight away. And we measure this type of stuff aligned with video analysis as well. And then you can see the high speed meters. So generally in international, this is the women's game. In international women, they probably run around 300 high intensity sprints. Okay. The metric around that is you need to travel 5 meters or greater per second. Okay. To register at high speed meters. And then you got the max speed, acceleration, deceleration, because hockey is very much stop, start, change direction as well. So that's from a club space. So that's super important. And on top of that as well is this total data is used to perform what's their workload look for the next week. Yeah. So hypothetically, you might have a player who hits 7 Ks there. They might be on a 4K session on their next session. Someone who's done probably I'd say 4.5 there, they might be on a 6.5 load at the next training session. So just a bit of an insight to athlete well-being and also management as well. Former S&C is put this together, and this is brilliant for us. On the left, you'll see the player's name, obviously blacked them out there, but you can also, top left, you can see I've just clicked on October, November, December, and January. So that pulls up the particular athlete that I spoke about, and that's their whole training environment from October to January. So we talk about the GPS data with the high-speed meters. Okay, down the bottom left here on the graph, as I said, most women's international games, they do 300 high-intensity sprints. This particular athlete is getting up to between 1,600. So when she transitions into game day, she does it with ease. It's very, very simple for her. She doesn't come off. She's not fatigued. We also see a lot more effectiveness with ball as well. So because if it's the decision-making under fatigue is there. So basically, we train the athlete for that moment. You can see a decline heading into that Christmas break. This particular athlete had some shin soreness and heat spots on the shins. So the physios and the sports doctors are telling me as a coach and the S&C staff, you need to pull right back on this athlete or she'll end up with stress fractures. Okay, and then we're off and gone again. So it's all controlled, and that's a live document. So I can click on all the way through their journey until they finish with us. This is with the elite athletes, of course. This is with Rhonda from the health science faculty. We did a study back in 2022, and Katrina's there as well. This is super for me, student engagement from the health science faculty, and I'll talk a little bit more in a sec. But this particular one was the biggest learnings I had from a coach and having an understanding about athlete well-being. Okay, so we were fortunate to have a student who would collect the data on each of these athletes, and you can see on the top across the top there, sorry. You got the fatigue, sleep, leg soreness, sore muscles, tightness, and it went all the way down to stress, mood, even menstrual cycles and a whole lot. So it was very, very useful data. The yellow ones here are just indicators that us as coaches just need to keep an eye on. Okay, there's a common theme start to appear there. The scores are low. We need to keep an eye on it. Ultimately, at the end of the day, our investment is the athlete. We need them on the pitch game day, not breaking down at training. So this was fantastic, and this is through a whole hockey season, and we found through this that we did not have one soft tissue injury throughout the season just because it was all controlled, and it's amazing from a club's perspective. That's very, very useful. Just talked about it, the health science faculty, and most of you in this room have got this amazing facility, but gee, I wish you're still at Cumbo because you get access to all of you again. But basically, with the relationship with Rhonda, who's been fantastic, and Shane as well in SUSF, we were able to create these student engagements with the hockey club and really build some good partnerships. And from my point of view, it was a win-win for both the hockey club and the students. So I'm looking to explore that with Anthony as well moving forward. The technology, okay, very simple at club level. Put 2 GoPros up behind the goal at the moment. Currently using Huddle and iCoder, so we can video analysis each athlete. Every time they touch the ball, I can send them all the clips. Okay, we align the video analysis up to the on-ball effectiveness and then to the GPS data. So we talk about with the video analysis, we've got guys who they might run 7-8 Ks, but they're just chasing the hockey ball and there's no effectiveness around it. So we pull the video and we'll align it together. stat sports into the GPS. Two of our Olympians here. So you got Alice Arnott, who will be in the quarterfinals tonight at 6 p.m. Playing, hopefully beating China. And then you got Greta Hayes on the far right, went to Tokyo. Greta unfortunately missed out on Tokyo this year. Some could say Alice took her spot. They're best friends, almost roommates as well. And one's gone to Paris and the other one just missed out. So they're athletes from Pathways, and both of them were involved with all that program to get them to reach their benchmark events. And, you know, if they honestly peeled it back, and the underlying club support they got them to the end Swiss and then on to Hockey Australia. And this is where I just want to touch on the transition from a club space and really into the performance side now. I'm fortunate to coach the New South Wales team as well. And at the moment, sorry, that's the last year's team, but moving to the 2024 program. So all of these, this particular tournament was as I talked about earlier, the most team-orientated sports with individual outcomes, because all of them were fighting for spots on the Olympic team, essentially. So we talked about team success will equal individual success. Yep, they all agreed that until they got on the pitch and it went out the window. It's all about themselves, which is understandable, but it's challenging within itself. But we're getting into the elite side of it now. And as I said, with rolling subs, there's so much information going back to the athletes, and the feedback we get from younger athletes transitioning to this space is it's an overload. Their heads are spinning. There's so much complex stuff going on, and even in match, they're not quite sure what message to absorb. So we try to limit the information we give them, but we also provide the support staff away from the training environment. And as you said, you got head coach, 2 assistant coaches, physio, sports science, strength conditioning, and performance analysis. And this is the main bit where I want to lead to. So this is the in-game data you'll see. We're on the bench. The players come off the field, they'll have a drink, they'll grab an iPad, and they'll see all this type of stuff. And as I said, under fatigue, it's a bit of a mess. But basically what we talk about in hockey is momentum shifts, okay? If we win the momentum shifts, we win the game. In this particular game, New South Wales, we're playing Hockey Club Melbourne. New South Wales is the yellow one, the yellow graph, and Hockey Club Melbourne is the black one. There's a number of formulas around it. It's around shots on goal. It's just missing that bottom bit there. So the circles are shots on goal, and then you've got the attacking 25, and then it's also possession aligned with field position. So there's a lot of formulas to it. So basically, you can see in the first quarter there, we're way off the mark. So we're missing the targets. Okay, started poorly in the second one. The second quarter, we tried to adjust the position, didn't work. So I'd pass an iPad to the athlete as they come off, because we're changed our structure and they've visually seen what's going on. And then we had the ability to control it and change it through their learnings as they're sitting on the bench. Coming off at 3/4 time, you can see we're very dominant. Basically, each of those circles, as I said, represent goal shots. We didn't actually score a goal in that quarter, but we had there's probably around 6, 7, 8 opportunities. Okay, so I just want to talk about the importance of the information for the athletes to get. And the more we can support them through their club journey, this becomes very much simple for them. This is also what they get on the iPad. It's also for the coaches. You can see a number of variety of stuff there. Where in this particular game, we've had 13 shots. Hockey Clubs had Melbourne, had 12 attacking entries, 12, 11. But the biggest one is on the left here from a player's perspective. So as they come off, if they clicked on any of those numbers on the left, they'll show you every instance that happened. For example, goal scoring opportunities. If they clicked on that, they'll show you every goal scoring shot opportunity they've had during the game. So if that opportunity presents again, they've got opportunities to rectify what didn't quite work and hopefully end up into scoring goals. This middle part's more for the coaches. We might have success around the left-hand side of the pitch, or maybe then the right-hand side. The opposition might be dominant on the left or the right. That's more the coaches space. Thank you for the opportunity to give you a bit of an insight to the hockey program, and more than welcome to take some questions.
Thank you very much, Scott. And a wonderful example of how academics and the coaching staff can work together, especially with Rhonda and your work for the last few years have been terrific. Yeah. We do have time for one question if anyone had the burning one, or we can leave it for when we have the networking drinks. Is there a particular one? All right, well, how about anybody who wants a template on how you can collaborate with a club? grab Scott in the network section.
Yeah,
Thank you.
definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to do a straw poll. We've got about 25 minutes to go, but we have been sitting for about 2 hours. Do people feel like they could push through for the last bit of rapid Spartan bites? Oh, look, there's a quite a chorus of nods. All right, brilliant. So why don't we kick through, and then that way we can get to our networking drinks and food freely. But feel free, absolutely, to get up, move around, excuse yourselves if you need to. So what we've got for this last session is something new that we thought we'd experiment with this year, which is Spartan Bites. We wanted to put a call out for any member of Spartan to grab 3 minutes to stand up in front of a room of colleagues and potential collaborators. I guess just to introduce themselves, show the work that they've been doing or are interested in doing, to provide the icebreaker that they might need for the networking session. And so we do have 7 3-minute presentations for you from our select members. And so we're going to kick off with Mr. Paul Bruce from Sydney University Sport and Fitness. Paul's a return offender, actually, because Paul gave a great presentation at last year's seminar. So I'm going to hand over to Paul to kick us off with Spartan Bites. And what I'll do is I'll just allow each speaker to come up next. So as you push through, Paul, the next speaker name should appear on the screen and they can make their way up. All right. Take it away, Paul.
Thank you. I'll be very fast because I need to be on pool deck in 20 minutes. From the last one, if you were here last year, we talked a little bit about our data analysis and what we're working towards. We've had an opportunity to sort of move that forward a little bit. And I'd like to look at measuring the effectiveness of using AI technology compared to traditional manual methods. And if anybody's got any interest in that kind of area, we'd be very interested to have a chat. So again, if you were here last year, we talked about the video analysis and the data that we get off the back. And then we have in the training environment, the coach's stopwatch and giving that direct feedback. What we've been presented with is something like this. So the first ones there were in a competition environment where you could see their 15-meter splits and those things coming directly onto a screen. We're lucky we do have a big electronic scoreboard at the pool, so we could put that on the scoreboard. And what we're looking at is using that in a training environment. So instead of a coach on the edge of the pool calling out times for every swimmer, the swimmer could come through, look up at the scoreboard, see their time, keep going to the other end, allowing the coach to actually coach rather than sit there and just call out times all day and be a traffic cop. So we have big advantages with doing that. I'm working with these guys for the next 6 months. So they've given me free access to their software to help them develop a product that they will then go on to sell. So my pitch to you is we'd like to put together a project for next year where we're measuring the speed and accuracy of the information, the accessibility in the information live or online, how we can get it to the athletes, measure the athlete engagement. Do they want a coach talking to them, or are they happy enough just to look up at a screen and get their data, or go home and get a report of their training session, those sort of things. And then what do we do with all this data? So if anybody's interested in that field of study, I'd love to talk to you about putting together something for next year. Thank you.
Paul, if you just progress to the next slide, the next speaker's name, there we go. So Dr. Elizabeth Machin, you're up next. Oh, did you?
Yes,
Oh.
that's okay. Hello, everyone. This is a study that Shane Ball and myself and our honours student, Chloe Tang, are running through the Sydney Uni Sport and Fitness Elite Athlete Program. I'm really happy because some of the coaches who we're working with are here today. So essentially, we are interested in sleep. We know that poor performance and injuries can sometimes be an outcome of non-ideal basic training approaches, but also coupled with potentially poor food or poor physical activity choices overall. But then we're interested in sleeping patterns in particular in these athletes and how these might impact performance, and then how poor sleep overall might affect performance, how rigorous training schedules can add to that load, how competition demands can particularly cause strain on student athletes, how college or group living situations can then add on to the challenges at play, frequent travel when they might be interstate or overseas for sport, and then academic load, because we are talking about student athletes here. And so the simplicity of just looking at nutrition and general behaviours, and we add in sport all of the different coaching support, kind of goes out the window when recovery and sleep is really compromised by some of these things. So our aim is to characterise student athlete sleep and recovery in relation to training load and academic workload using a combination of subjective outcomes, so things that we measure through questionnaires, and objective outcomes. I did bring my watch, but because I've been called up late, it's sitting in the chair behind, but using actigraphy, so wrist-worn devices to look at sleep-wake behaviour in these student athletes. And then we would be measuring their sleep, their recovery and fatigue through a range of different things. In sleep, we talk about quality a lot, but quality is subjective. Whether your watch tells you you've had a good sleep or enough sleep differs from what you may have felt was good sleep. There's a lot of people nodding in the room. Don't look at the watch all the time, listen to yourself. And that's something that we pass on to athletes as well. So we are looking at 4 study periods in particular. We've got our baseline measures where we look at the beginning at what our athletes look like and what maybe some of our concerns should be or are. And then we look at 4 different periods, and these are periods related to the academic or the athlete season. So in particular, we've got the athlete pre-season coupled with them being out of semester. Period 2 is in season and out of semester. Period 3 is in season and in semester. And period 4 is in season and exam period. When do we think the highest stress and load will be? Period 4, perhaps, but in the lead up as well. So we're trying to understand what are the different challenges for these student athletes at these different phases. Now, I have 10 seconds to show you our very preliminary results. This is just from our baseline surveys. We have 27 enrolled athletes. We can send it a whole lot more. So if you are coaches here and we visited you and they said yes, tell them that they can still come back and be measured. But when we looked at the athlete sleep screening questionnaire, the ASSQ, their total sleep time was adequate. That's based on self-report. We have got actigraphy for a week to qualify if that's actually the case during the season. So 7.7 hours a night. Their sleep difficulty was rated as moderate. Their subjective sleep quality was poor. So there's adequate sleep duration, but they're subjectively feeling that their sleep is poor. When we look at the insomnia severity index and the ASSQ, we're seeing that these athletes have non-clinical levels of insomnia. So not enough that we'd medicate or we refer them on to sleep psychologists specifically, but some general education and support there might help. We looked also at what's called the Munich chronotype questionnaire. If you've heard of morningness, eveningness, if you're a morning bird or a morning lark or a night owl, and we found that many were of a morning chronotype, which is interesting. And then we found that we've got low levels of sleep disorder breathing in these cohorts. So that's to be expected. Minimal travel disturbance, but that we had poor sleep hygiene, in particular related to the use of stimulants. So caffeine is our primary culprit there, I hope. And we will know a lot more by the end of this. But if you're interested in getting your athletes on board, please sing out. Or if you're interested in helping support with the project, please sing out. Thank you. You're welcome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Saz, and I'm a second-year PhD candidate at the University of Sydney. And I'm a data scientist who is trying to understand the person-specific predictors of athlete performance. So my research kind of focuses on what Shona was presenting about, like wearables and all the issues. And she had that massive slide with all the issues. I'm trying to figure out all those issues, which is a bit of a challenge, but I'm ready for it. So I want to co-design an interactive system that can present a holistic picture of the athlete that athletes actually find useful and easy to understand. So I'm when I say holistic, I really mean 4 pillars is what I call them. So I'm saying physical health, mental health, nutrition, and sleep, because they all affect each other. It's not like one simple correlation between the 2 variables. All 4 of them will affect everything. So if I get an 8 hours of sleep, maybe I will have better mental clarity, meaning I will make better nutrition decisions, meaning I will perform better, et cetera, et cetera. So to my knowledge, there's no analytical tool that actually quantitatively understands all of these interrelated variables together. And we need to start connecting the network. So how do we do that? So first up, we need to integrate data sources on all 4 pillars. Second, we need to account for sport-specific, short-term, and long-term goals of the athlete to actually personalize feedback properly. So in terms of integrating the 4 pillars, the research has been very coach-centric. What does the coach want to see in platforms, et cetera, et cetera? But who are wearing the wearables? Athletes. So I went on and I asked some athletes, okay, what pillars do you find important to track in terms of performance? So the top one, the top figure at the top, it shows that athletes in general find all pillars important to track for performance. Okay, you find it important. Are you actually tracking that? That's not the case. So especially for like mental health and nutrition, you're seeing a lot more red. So they find it really important that yes, nutrition is important for my performance. It's impeccable, but I'm not tracking it. Why? What's the gap? So we see value in tracking and monitoring tools, but now we need to give a fair play at actually maximizing its use. And I think Shona mentioned like Whoop and Oura Rings and other wearables. And I think Whoop is going in the right direction in the sense that it's, you're able to look at your physical strain, you're able to look at your mental health because you can kind of use a journal to track your behavioral variables, but it lacks statistical rigor. Even the algorithms are proprietary. We don't know what's going on underneath, but even from what we can tell, it's not right. Like something's missing. You get simple correlations between, for example, how stressed I am to my recovery, but it's not a simple correlation, right? There's so many different factors in play. So as a data scientist, I look at graphs that Whoop and the AMS produce, and I'm like, where are my interaction terms? Where are my mediators? Where's my measures of uncertainty? Like I'm using all these buzzwords, but they matter. And for an athlete, they also matter because it's like, how sure am I that my wearable is telling me the truth of what I'm feeling? So I've outlined a lot of problems, and I'm sorry I don't have the solution right now yet, but I'm determined to create one. So a lot of people might think that numbers are cold and intuition and experience is where the gold is at. But there are statistical measures out there that will treat your athletes as dynamic individuals and who are unique. And if you use the right method, we can really personalize feedback to the athlete, and it can be all the better for their performance. So in the next couple of months, I'll be conducting focus groups, and I'm currently recruiting coaches and athletes. So this is your chance to get involved and revolutionize the way that we quantify athletes. And I promise to ensure that their spirit isn't lost in the numbers. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for the opportunity to present. I do want to just point out there is a bit of a spelling error in my name. So it's Sharon instead of Sharon, but I've had that plenty across my life. But enough of the rambling. So my area of interest is masters athletes, and I want to present to you these exemplars of successful aging. So compared to the general population, there's good evidence to show that masters athletes do have lower prevalence of chronic conditions and also an improved risk profile. So that includes lower BMI or glycemic control and also resting blood pressure. And because the general population is getting older and faster, there are also some concerning trends that are associated with this in terms of physical decline. And so I guess this kind of forms a background to my PhD project. And we're looking to gain some key insights into masters athletes in particular in relation to their nutrition and their health status, in order to gain a bit more of an understanding of this unique group of older adults. So I guess I want to first start with who is a Masters athlete. There are various definitions that you might find in the literature, but there are a couple of common themes. So generally they are over the age of 35 and can range well into their hundreds. So that means that they span quite a large age range and also various life stages. So very unique and complex type of group of individuals. They also may participate in competitions that are specifically designed for older athletes. So this might be something like the Australian Masters Games or the World Masters Games. They also engage in systematic training, and the sports that they can participate in vary greatly as well. So they can be in endurance activities, power sports, or mixed or team sports as well. And so each Masters athlete presents really unique backgrounds and also experiences, and therefore varying levels of exposure to sport and health specific nutrition education. And so despite there being evidence of a lower prevalence of chronic disease or chronic conditions in this particular cohort, they're not necessarily immune from these as well. So some Masters athletes, they might have been actually prompted by a health scare, for example, to actually start their sporting journey. And so these underlying conditions might actually influence their current nutrition or dietary practices, and then also their current sort of health status as well. So as well with the increase in participation in Masters sports, it's also crucial to acknowledge that despite their growing presence, there still remains a notable gap in the research concerning these unique athletes. So to give a bit more of an overview of my project, there are two parts. And so if you're working with Masters athletes or you know of a Masters athlete, I would love to hear from you and get some more, more information, because we are hoping to start recruitment soon. So I do have a QR code, but it is a little bit covered by the image at the moment. But in terms of the project itself, participants can opt to partake in parts A and B, or just part A only, so focusing just on the dietary assessment. But in terms of part A, we're starting with a dietary assessment with 4-day food diaries and also a series of questionnaires. So we're looking at dietary quality, which is the athlete diet index, also nutrition knowledge, which is the PEAKS NQ. And so the ADI and the PEAKS NQ actually form part of the ASNAP platform, which is the Accelerated Sports Nutrition Assessment platform. And this was done by prior USyd researchers as well, in collaboration with other universities too. But they're really great tools to assess diet and nutrition. And our final questionnaire that we're looking at is athlete food choice questionnaire. So we're looking at into what sort of factors influence their food choices as well. And then for part B of our study, we're looking at assessments of their health and fitness status. So we would like to have athletes undertake a series of physical assessments. So this can range from anthropometry measures and also a number of body comp measures too. So that includes high quality DEXA scans, our new BOD machine, which is coming, well, it's arrived. And so we're hoping to start using it very soon. And then also bioelectrical impedance and skin folds. And also things like resting metabolic rate, functional assessments, strength testing, and VO2. And I've been told that my time is up. So yeah, please scan the QR code or reach out to me, have a chat, and yeah, we'd love to have your athletes on board.
Thank you. Hey, I'm Elle, and I am a first-year PhD candidate with the School of Design, Architecture and Urban Planning. And I've got two awesome supervisors, and one is in the room. I'm also an ultra trail runner, so that is why I have decided to explore the application of design to increase diversity and representation in ultra trail running. So what I'll do is I'll just give an overview of what my research is about, and then say how people in the audience can potentially help. So Whilst there has been an introduction of a number of initiatives to increase diversity and representation in trail and ultra trail running, such as pregnancy deferral policies and disability policies, the sport continues to remain white, male dominated and ableist. Also, a lot of underrepresented communities, such as people of colour, people with a disability, people from the LGBTQI communities, don't necessarily see themselves represented in the sport, so they do perceive it as being exclusionary. When taking a gender stance, there's about 23% of women who compete in ultra trail and trail running throughout, globally. And in Australia, it seems to be that women are overrepresented in 11 and 22 kilometre distances, so the shorter distance events, but they're significantly underrepresented in longer distance events, which are the events that I like to compete in, which are the 100 kilometre and 100 mile events. So they usually are about 16%. So my research has two key aims. So the first part of my research is looking at place-based experiences of runners more broadly. So I want to do a comparative analysis. So runners more broadly from both dominant and underrepresented groups to look at how they perceive the environments that they run in, their motivators and barriers to participation, and also their perceptions of diversity within the communities that they run in. And part two of my research will use design-led participatory action research to co-design innovative solutions. So design in this context refers to the use of creative methodologies, so creative thinking, creative problem solving, to address a problem by involving the people who are going to be impacted by that solution and co-create that positive future state. I'll have two key contributions. One of them is just contributing to lived experience understandings, but the key contribution is methodological. So to our knowledge, no study has applied design to that running context. So it's quite unique in that way. I seek to use two event-based case studies, so Pilliga Ultra and Run Everest, and I'll be a participant observer in both case studies. And I'll also be doing a pop-up engagement at the Pilliga Ultra. I'll also have a 5-month live data collection, and this is where people from the audience can come in, or if you know athletes who run at least once a week. So during this time, I'll be doing a survey, photo submission, and interviews. So anyone that's competed in the Pilliga Ultra or Run Everest will be reflecting on their event-based experiences, but any non-event-based participants will be reflecting on their general training experiences or the running communities that they are part of. And that just seeks to enable that comparative analysis across different distances. Part one of my research will inform part two, which will happen in year 2 and year 3. So in terms of what people from the audience can contribute, if you happen to know anyone that runs once a week or you yourself run once a week, would love you to contribute to the research or participate in any combination of the ongoing data collection, or I'm definitely open to research or future collaborations, particularly in regards to running and diversity in sport. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, so I'm Dr. Alicia Fong Yan. Just a little bit about me is that I used to be a professional dancer. I still teach dance at the moment, and I've taught everyone from as young as 4 years old all the way through to adults, older adults even now. And I'm a senior lecturer in the discipline of exercise and sports science. So this is just a little bit about this project that one of my projects that I'm working on. So when we look at a lot of the sports that have frequent landings like basketball, volleyball, we see that they have a lot of high impacts and a lot of frequent landings. The landings can be more than 2 times body weight, 3 times body weight very easily, and it can be landing on one or both legs. But in particular, what I'll get you to notice is the position of the body when they are landing. It's not necessarily going to be in a nice, neat package when they come down. What I've seen in particular is a similarity between dance and sport. Now, dance, there are some studies that I've been involved in that have shown that dancers have similar frequency of high impact landings and also a similar level of impact as well, similar magnitude of impact as well. Now, the addition for dance, the additional challenge is that on top of experiencing and trying to endure all of these high impacts is that they also have to try and make it look easy. So the aesthetics of dance then requires them not only to make it look easy, but it needs to sound easy, which means that they can't make a sound. It has to be a quiet and soft landing, no matter how high they need to jump. So one of these things that this is feeding into is the fact that when we have multiple landing tasks is a risk of ACL injury. And we find that dancers do get ACL injuries, but at a far, far lower rate than athletes do. And this is looking at non-contact ACL specifically. Obviously, as soon as there's contact involved, that's a whole host of other regulations to look at. But when we're looking at non-contact ACL injuries, the athletes are not just hurting their ACLs or tearing their ACLs on the landing, they are also doing it on the point of takeoff, where they're looking at some of the technique in terms of alignment of the body segments and where the other body segments are positioned, as well as the impact itself upon that landing. Now, one of the things that we are exploring is whether or not we can get where the difference lies between dancers and athletes in terms of their landing mechanics. And a study that I was involved in previously was looking at just a regular drop landing. And we found that even though it was a non-dance task, the dancers still landed like dancers. So what I would like to see is, can we train the athletes to land more like dancers to see if we can help them reduce their ACL injury risk? So the Feed Forward Load Attenuation Training Project, FLOAT, what we're currently doing now, we would like to recruit some more athletes. We're going to get them to do a regular drop landing, followed by some trials where we give them the verbal cue to try and land as quietly as possible. And so if you have any athletes that are currently doing a landing type sport like basketball, volleyball, any other badminton, I think some of the players go up quite high and have some strange landings. We'd be really happy to hear from you guys and have you, your athletes involved in our study. Now, what this study is going to do is then look at the variables that are going to distinguish between those hard and soft landings and potentially put this towards a wearable feedback device. So in dance, they can really hear that hard landing. It's very loud. But in sporting contexts, you have a noisy environment, multiple players all doing different things. It is very difficult for a coach to be able to give that individual feedback of whether that landing is hard. And so if we can get the right variables to be able to distinguish between those, we can then feed that into a wearable device that can then give that athlete individualized and immediate feedback. Obviously, we can also look into some training interventions. A lot of the FIFA training exercises will train landing, but it's all very much here and closed, very compact. That's not what happens when the injury happens. So I'd like to have a chat to anyone who's interested in exploring this across different sports and tell me what your training currently is. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Now, I think I'm the lucky last. Woohoo! Yeah, so after me, food and coffee and party time. Yay. I also didn't put together an intro slide, so we're straight into the content, but, oh, wrong way. Hey, there we are. My title didn't turn up. Anyway, that's fine. So very brief intro. I am also a lecturer with the discipline of exercise and sports science. My area of research is para-athlete performance science. So Mel, I will be speaking with you later on. Part of my PhD sort of sparked what I'm talking to you about right now, which is I'm interested in the risk of fracture for athletes with cerebral palsy. So what we know from epidemiological research on overall populations with CP is that there is a real risk of fracture. There's 2.5 times greater incidence of fracture in adults with CP, almost 6 times greater risk of osteoporosis, and that adults, young adults with CP have a similar risk of osteoporosis to general population adults older than 50 years. So it's really significant. It gets worse with age. and the risk is also worse for a greater degree of impairment. So that's the landscape for people with CP, not necessarily athletes. We don't know what the risk is in athletes because, as Mel pointed out, there's very little performance-based research done on para-athletes. Part of my PhD did look at bone mineral density and compared a group of athletes to non-athletes. What that found, as I've represented up here, is that there is some protective benefit for long-term sport participation to low bone density and appendicular lean mass, which is the ALM there. So that's your muscle mass in your arms and your legs. Sport can be protective, but possibly not protective enough. So 4 of the athletes in my study who were competitive national or international level athletes actually met the diagnostic criteria for osteoporosis, which is a real problem considering the sports they're participating in, the training that they're undertaking. So what I want to do is establish what the actual real prevalence of fracture is in this athlete group to work out, do we actually need some different practices, some management or risk mitigation strategies for these athletes, screening, what do we need to do to keep these athletes healthy while they're competing to prolong their careers, but also for their long-term well-being. So on that note, I want to talk to anyone in this room who's interested in working with me on this project. Ideally, I'd like to use existing data within the athlete management system to determine what is that prevalence of fracture, how do athletes with CP compare to other athlete groups, either other para-athletes or non-disabled athletes, and what can we do to mitigate the risks? So please come talk to me. Thank you, and party time.
Thank you very much, Jen. And thank you very much, everybody. That was a very big effort of going through all our presentations. So well done to everybody. I'd ask one more round of applause to all of our wonderful speakers. It's a very big thank you to our keynote in Shonda coming down to Sydney for the presentation, but also a very big congratulations and thank you to all the academics and coaches presenting on all the wonderful work that we've got going. But as Jen said, it's now time that the food and drink is being provided. We're pretty much right on time. Is that right, Noah? Perfect. So please make yourselves comfortable outside, although it is indoors, and we'll catch up soon. Thank you very much.